Hibiki is a weak, useless high schooler who is currently running for his life in an open field while being chased by a rabbit. My ego says I could probably beat that rabbit in a one-on-one, but Hibiki's ego apparently has the day off, so he doesn't want to take any chances. While he's running, he suddenly hears a strange voice in his head, and for a second, he thinks it might be his ego coming to give him advice, but whatever that voice is, it's way too lazy to even bother doing its job. Just then, the rabbit catches up to Hibiki, but in the split second before he gets stabbed, Hibiki manages to pull off one of the most accidental clutches in history. He gets the rabbit's head stuck in his bag, and then he trips and falls over right on top of its head, killing the rabbit instantly. Meanwhile, out in the forest, an elf suddenly hears a voice tell her that someone very precious has just been dropped in the east. Her name is Amalia, and as you can see, she suffers from an abundance of personality. Back on Hibiki's end, he is glad he managed to survive the rabbit attack, but he's still not sure what he's supposed to do because he has no clue where this place is. He has no cell service, and a moment ago, he was hearing voices in his head. His top priority right now should be to gather the necessities for survival, but he never really went camping as a kid, so he doesn't know how to start a fire, and he's not sure if the rabbit meat is even edible. Just as he's wondering what to do, he hears the voice in his head again, and it offers to appraise the rabbit for him. As it says this, a screen appears in front of Hibiki, and he is informed that the horned rabbit meat is indeed edible. Hibiki has no idea why he is seeing floating screens out of nowhere, but if the rabbit meat really is edible, then he decides it would be best if he took it with him just in case he needs food later. After sticking the rabbit carcass in his bag, Hibiki starts trying to figure out what that voice in his head was, and he recalls that the last time it spoke, it was responding to a question he asked, so he holds up his bag and asks what it is. Just as expected, the system responds and informs Hibiki that it is a bag made from materials that do not exist in this world. He now knows how to trigger the system's responses, so he decides to try a few other things and asks the system to appraise the sky, but the system tells him that there's nothing there to be appraised. He then looks to the ground and asks the system to appraise it, and to his horror, he is informed that he is looking at a level 273 Maze Eater. Hibiki tries it a few more times to make sure it's not a fluke, but the ground is definitely a Maze Eater, and he's not prepared to deal with that, so he decides to ignore it and move on. He then attempts to appraise himself, and sure enough, a panel shows up with his name, age, and stats all laid out. Hibiki is 16 years old, and his job is apparently that of an appraiser, which makes no sense to him, because up until a few minutes ago, he was still just a normal high schooler. He attempts to ask the system how he ended up here, but it doesn't respond to him this time, and now that he thinks about it, he has been way too casual about there being a disembodied voice in his head. He asks the system what it is, and he is informed that the system is his status support, and it is not allowed to answer any questions about personal information. It is also not allowed to talk to him unless it's answering a question, so Hibiki can't hold conversations with it at all. From his status screen, Hibiki can see that he has a bunch of skills and he's not sure what they do, so he decides to try them out one after the other. The first skill he uses is called Expert Eye, and for a second, Hibiki's ego kicks in, making him believe he's about to become a top 3 isekai protagonist with this, but nothing happens. Fortunately, no one was here to see him embarrass himself like that, but he now knows that he knows absolutely nothing about these skills, so he asks the system if there's a tutorial of some kind that he can use. The system informs Hibiki that he is already in the tutorial, but he's not sure what that's supposed to mean, so he decides to continue testing out his skills. The next one is called World Map, and as he activates the skill, a screen appears in front of him with a bunch of lines drawn on it. This isn't exactly what he was expecting when he activated the world map, but he assumes the lines must represent the path he took to get here when he was running away from the rabbit. By the looks of things, he has been traveling in circles this entire time, which is disheartening to find out, but at least now he won't make that same mistake again. After walking for a while, Hibiki eventually finds a road, and he's really excited because this means he can finally make his way to a town. But he apparently got a little too excited because he ends up tripping and falling face first onto the stone-cold road. Just then, the system informs Hibiki that he has received the title of castaway in an isekai, which makes no sense to him, so he adds it to the growing list of things he doesn't understand. As he looks away from the system window, he suddenly hears the sound of a growl terrifyingly close to him, and even my ego doesn't think I could handle this one, so Hibiki is definitely cooked. Fortunately for him, the monster gets shot in the head before it can hurt him, and the one responsible for the shot is Amalia. She walks up to Hibiki and asks if he's okay, and Hibiki says he's fine, but then she asks him what he was doing in the Maze Eater. Hibiki still has no idea what a Maze Eater is, so Amalia explains that it's a monster that usually disguises itself as grassland. It won't attack you directly most of the time, but it makes people who get stuck in it travel in circles until they eventually get exhausted, at which point it devours them. Hibiki is shocked that he was so close to being devoured, but when Amalia asks him why he was out there in the first place, he explains that it wasn't his choice. He just kind of showed up there. Amalia is really confused when she hears that. So while she's trying to figure out what Hibiki means, Hibiki tries to figure out who she is by appraising her. Thanks to the system, Hibiki learns that Amalia is a real-life elf, but the most shocking piece of information is the fact that she's 56 because he thought she was way younger. Amalia suddenly pulls Hibiki's head into her chest and says she's glad that an innocent child didn't fall victim to the maze eater, but hearing her call him a child. Hibiki asks Amalia how old she thinks he is. Because of how short Hibiki is, Amalia had assumed that he was 10 years old at most, but he informs her that he's actually 16, and pulling a random teenager into your chest is weird no matter how you look at it, especially because in this world, you are considered an adult once you turn 15. Hibiki and Amalia end up spending the night camping together, and Amalia apologizes for the misunderstanding earlier, but Hibiki says it didn't really bother him. After eating the horned rabbit Hibiki caught for dinner, the two sit down to have some tea, and Hibiki takes the opportunity to ask Amalia what this place is. She explains that this is the kingdom of Habarashia, but she doesn't understand how Hibiki could be so clueless about this country. So he explains that he's not from around here. He says he comes from a faraway country called Japan, but Amalia says she's never heard of a place like that before, and the fact that she doesn't know what Japan is confirms to Hibiki that he is indeed in a new world. Amalia can tell that Hibiki must be anxious about being so far away from home, so she offers to stay for a while and take him to a nearby city so he can get his life started, and Hibiki really appreciates the gesture. Once it's time for bed, Amalia casts an air alarm spell to warn her in case anything dangerous gets close, but Hibiki had already fallen asleep before she was done casting. She's surprised that he trusts her so much even though he literally just met her, and that's not the only thing that's strange about this kid. He has no knowledge of this world, and he is wearing clothes that she has never seen before, so she assumes he must be the precious person that the spirits told her about before she came here. Before Hibiki was sent to this world, he would spend his days hanging around with his friends, and they were all excited for the upcoming summer break since they had all grown so much, all except Hibiki, who's still a solid 4'11". The others try to encourage him by saying there's still hope for a growth spurt down the line, but Taiki, on the other hand, is actually jealous of Hibiki because, somehow, in exchange for the debuff in height, all the MILFs he meets absolutely fawn over Hibiki, and he has no idea why. Now that he thinks about it, Taiki is right. That conversation happened on the last day of school before summer break, and Hibiki was about to enter a classroom when all of a sudden, there was a bright flash of light, and the next thing he knew, he was here. Hibiki wakes up and wonders if his friends are alright because they are probably worried sick about him right now, and to make matters worse, his phone is at 12%, so it's going to be dead soon. Just then, he feels something hard hit his head, so he looks over to see where it came from, and it turns out it was just a button that couldn't contain Amalia's personality. He gets up to take a look at all the floating particles in the air, and he's curious about what they are, so he asks the system to appraise them. And he is informed that these are part of a magic barrier that Amalia set up to warn her of intruders. The fact that magic exists here is further proof that this isn't his original world, so Hibiki needs to start thinking of a way to get back as soon as possible. He sits on a rock nearby and decides to take a look at his stats again to figure out what he's got. He asks the system what an appraiser is, so the system explains an appraiser is a job class of B-rank rarity. It allows you to view the information and abilities related to a target, but since it is a non-combat class, it doesn't come with any skills that are useful in battle. That's all the system is willing to tell him. But Hibiki still has a lot of questions, like what the provisional part of his job means, but he's going to have to leave that for another day. The next morning, Amalia wakes up and is startled by the realization that her melons have been hanging in the wind all night because she didn't realize she had lost a button. A moment later, Hibiki wakes up, so she turns away in embarrassment, and when Hibiki realizes what's going on, he pulls out the button that hit him in the face last night. But that makes Amalia think he intentionally stole her button, so she punches him in the face. A little while later, once the misunderstanding has been cleared up, Amalia apologizes to Hibiki for hitting him. Hibiki says it's fine since she did give him a potion to heal his wounds, so there are no hard feelings. As they walk, Hibiki asks Amalia how far away the city is from here, and by her calculations, once they get out of the forest, they should be able to get there in about half a day. Hibiki is glad to hear that, but he is a little worried by the fact that there are monsters all over the place. Amalia tells him he doesn't need to worry about monsters as long as she's with him, but she's surprised that he could sense the monsters in the first place. Hibiki says he just saw them thanks to his world map skill, but the second Amalia hears that, she freaks out because the world map skill is an insanely useful AAA skill. She says any adventurer would love to have a skill like that, but Hibiki doesn't get what the big deal is since all it does is show him where he has been before and alert him to nearby monsters. As a matter of fact, he can see something called a crystal horned rabbit nearby, and the second Amalia hears that, she becomes excited because crystal horned rabbits are extremely valuable. They are easily worth over 200 gold coins, so she grabs Hibiki and asks him to show her where the rabbit is. They eventually track the crystal horned rabbit down, and after appraising it, Hibiki finds out a few things about it. It is stupid, it has an escape skill, and it also has a detect presence skill. Amalia is able to mask the scent and sound of herself and Hibiki using her wind magic to keep the rabbit from sensing them, but as long as it has the escape skill, none of Amalia's attacks are going to land. However, there is one exception. When the crystal horned rabbit is attacking, it can't use its escape skill, and now that Hibiki knows that, he comes up with a plan. He suggests they should trick the rabbit into attacking him so it can't use escape. Amalia doesn't think the rabbit will fall for such a simple trick, but Hibiki assures her that it will work. When it's time to execute the plan, Amalia creates a bunch of rock walls around it to force it towards Hibiki, who is laying on a rock as bait, and once it starts charging at him, she shoots it in the head. She's surprised by how easy that was since she expected such a valuable monster to be harder to catch, but she's not complaining about the easy victory. Hibiki also leveled up a lot from the success, even though Amalia was the one who killed the rabbit because he contributed a lot to the success of the plan, so it's a win-win. Hibiki and Amalia later arrive in the city of Raoul, and since Hibiki's strange clothes would probably draw some unwanted attention, Amalia offers him her hood to cover up until he can get a new set of clothes. She also reminds him they're going to get a good chunk of change after she sells this crystal horn, so they can go shopping for some armor and weapons too. Speaking of money, Hibiki asks her how much a gold coin is worth here, but she is shocked to hear that, of all things, Hibiki is even oblivious to how money works. Hibiki doesn't want to lower her impression of him any further, so he pretends that he was just joking about it and instead asks the system to explain it to him. The system responds and explains that one gold coin is worth around 10,000 yen. So when Amalia said that horn is worth 200 gold, that's the equivalent of 2 million yen. It makes sense that she was so eager to get it. Amalia puts her hand on Hibiki's face and tells him that he should probably refrain from making himself sound totally clueless in this town, because if he's not careful, he's going to get scammed. He knows she's right, but the way she said it really annoys him for some reason. A few minutes later, Hibiki and Amalia arrive at the guild, and the other guild patrons are surprised to see her, but even more surprised that a loner like her has a friend now. They don't understand why she'd be hanging out with a child, but Amalia explains that Hibiki may be vertically challenged. He is actually an adult. The adventurers assume that must mean he's a rookie, so they apologize for teasing him about his height and wish him luck on his first day. Once they are gone, Amalia takes Hibiki up to the front desk to meet the receptionist, Jewel, and Hibiki can't help but notice that Jewel has cat ears. Amalia tells Jewel that she would like to sell an item, so she wants to negotiate in a private room. Jewel understands, so she leads them to the guild master's office, where Hibiki is introduced to the guild master, Balls. The moment Hibiki sees Balls, he is left in absolute awe because he has never seen such a hulking form of perfection before. Balls can tell that Hibiki is a fellow muscle enthusiast, so he takes his shirt off to flex the fruits of his years of work. Hibiki is even more amazed now, so he asks Balls if he has any tips for him. He had tried working out in the past to make up for his lack of height with muscles, but his frame is too small, so he never got much out of it. Balls starts giving him some useful gym advice, but Jewel and Amalia are starting to get impatient because they came here to sell an item, not talk about muscles, so they both blast Hibiki and Balls with water to snap them out of it. Once the two of them have dried off, they all sit down to begin the negotiations, and as Amalia sets the horn down, Balls is impressed because this one is 3 times as big as the one she brought in a few years ago. He offers her 400 gold coins for it on the spot, and Hibiki thinks that's a really good deal since Amalia was only expecting 200 gold for it. However, he severely underestimated just how greedy Amalia can be, because now that she knows she can get more money for it, she demands 800 gold coins instead. Ball says he can't go that high on the price, but Amalia forces him into making a decision by threatening to go to the guild in the capital for a better deal. Balls eventually caves and agrees to pay 700 gold coins for it, which was way over budget. Amalia is happy that she managed to secure such a good deal for herself, because now Hibiki will definitely ask her to form a party with him, and then she won't be a loner anymore. She's so happy that she could jump for joy, but maybe she got a little too excited because her button decides to go on vacation again, and her chest is left in plain view once again. As such, Jewel kicks both Balls and Hibiki out of the room so she can fix Emalia's clothes, and since that's going to take a while, Hibiki decides to go wait at a table. While he's there, the system informs him that his level 1 tutorial skill has reached the level up requirements, which is nice. But Hibiki isn't exactly sure what that means, so he asks for an explanation. The system explains that the tutorial is a skill that basically grants plot armor to those who have an extremely low survival rate, and it was specifically designed by God to ensure that Hibiki didn't die at spawn. Hibiki can't believe he really received a skill from God, but just then, he hears a separate voice in his head, and it turns out to be that of the God who has been looking out for him. He wouldn't have made it this far without the God's help, so he is thankful. However, the God tells him that he's still got to do his best to keep himself alive, because his plot armor won't last forever. A few moments later, Emalia returns after getting her shirt fixed, but just then, she receives a letter for a mission request, and it involves her hometown, so she can't turn it down. She also isn't going to be able to bring Hibiki along, so she apologizes, but she's going to have to leave town for a while. Meanwhile, inside a dark cave, a female adventurer is busy searching for something, but no matter how much she looks, she can't find any traces of it, so she has no idea where it could be. Back in the city, Emalia asks Hibiki if he's really going to be alright on his own, but he tells her he can handle himself. He is grateful to Emalia for helping him so far, but he doesn't want to continue being a burden to her, so he needs to figure out how to get by on his own. He says he plans to become an adventurer because he saw a couple of quests back at the guild that even a non-combatant like him would be able to take. Emalia is glad to hear that Hibiki already has a plan in mind, and to make things a little easier for him, she tells him he can stay in the room she rents in the meantime. She hands him a map and tells him that when he gets there, he should ask for a lady named Tanya, and she'll take care of him. She promises to see him again once she gets back, but just as she's about to leave, Hibiki recalls that he needs to give her back her poncho. Emalia tells him he can just keep it, but Hibiki thinks she needs it way more than he does because her buttons keep popping off all the time. After recalling what happened, Emalia runs off in embarrassment because she can't believe Hibiki has seen her chest 3 times now. However, she isn't watching where she's going, so she ends up bumping into that adventurer from earlier. She manages to catch herself before she falls over and immediately apologizes, asking if the girl is okay, but the girl doesn't look away at all. A guard comes over after hearing all the commotion and asks Emalia why she's in such a rush, so Emalia explains that she's actually on her way to complete a mission in her hometown. As soon as the girl hears this, she becomes interested and asks if Emalia is referring to the elf village of Fairnote. After Emalia confirms this, the girl gets a sly grin across her face. She then mentions that she happens to be heading there as well, so she and Emalia should be able to travel together. After Emalia leaves, Hibiki spends almost all of his time sleeping indoors, and his phone battery is completely dead, so there's nothing for him to do. He doesn't really have to worry about money after the horn sale, but he still hasn't found a way to return home yet, and the god hasn't spoken to him since then. He tries asking Jewel if she knows anything about another world, but that apparently means something very different here, because she becomes all shy and points him to an NSFW place center, which is not what he was looking for. Hibiki really doesn't want people to get suspicious of him, so he has been avoiding interactions a lot lately, but he can't keep this up forever. Just then, Tanya knocks on Hibiki's door. The reason she came is because Hibiki didn't come down for breakfast or lunch earlier today, so she was starting to get worried. He assures her that he is perfectly fine, and Tanya is glad to hear it, so she reminds him that dinner will be ready soon and that he should come down when he is ready to eat. Hibiki thanks her, and after she leaves, he realizes that he's going to have to start making some money, because that horn money isn't going to last forever. He asks the system to pull up his stats so he can figure out what he would be good at, and the system does as instructed. But Hibiki doesn't really know whether his stats are good or not, so he asks the system for its opinion. The system tells him he is basically cannon fodder with his current stats, so he shouldn't even consider attempting solo combat as he is now. Hibiki kind of figured that would be the case, so he decides to take a look at his skills to see if there's anything useful there. He finds out that he has a skill called Lady's Magnet, but he's not sure what that does. He also has 2 other skills, Contract and Medicine. He asks the system what medicine does since it sounds kind of useful, and the system informs him that it is a skill that allows him to gain detailed medical knowledge by downloading 7 years of medical school right into his head. That sounds really cool, so Hibiki says he wants to try it out, but the system warns him that he can't stop the process once it starts, and the medical books are pretty thick, so it's going to take a while. Hibiki is a little hesitant after hearing that, but he still decides to go ahead with it anyway, and for once, the system sounds genuinely disappointed by his decision. Shortly after, the medical book appears in front of Hibiki, and the information transfer begins, but it hurts a lot more than Hibiki thought it would. A few days later, the knowledge transfer is finally complete, and Hibiki feels absolutely terrible because he hasn't eaten or slept for so long. He decides to head out to do some shopping and clear his head, and after getting a meal, he buys himself a set of armor and general adventuring equipment. He also comments on the fact that gaining skills is a lot harder than he thought it would be. The system tells him that not all skills require the book download method, so he doesn't need to worry about that. Hibiki also notices that the system seems a lot more talkative ever since his tutorial leveled up, and since she is actually willing to hold a conversation with him, he decides to give her a real name, saying he will call her Sapo. And Sapo seems pretty happy about it. Hibiki heads back to the guild to see if there are any quests for him, but just then, that adventurer party he met when he first arrived rushes in because one of them has been severely injured in battle. The guy is missing an arm and a leg, and he is still bleeding profusely, so if nothing is done, he's going to die in no time. Balls would have been able to save him, but unfortunately, Jewel says he's not in town right now, and they've tried all the other healing magic they know, but nothing has worked. Hibiki sees how bad the guy's condition is, and he wants to help, so he decides to try out his newly acquired medical skills to see if that helps. He walks over and asks the group if they'd be willing to let him take a look. The party is so desperate that they don't have much of a choice, so they let Hibiki examine their friend, and after using an examination skill, the system informs Hibiki that the man is currently under the effect of deer poison, which is why his bleeding isn't stopping. He only has around 5 minutes left before he dies, so the only way to save him would be to use the Perfect Heal and Perfect Cure spells. However, using those spells would cost over 600 MP, and Hibiki currently only has 56, so there's no way he could pull it off. The others see the worried expression on Hibiki's face and ask him if something is wrong, so he tells them that he knows how to treat their friend, but he can't do anything to help because he doesn't have enough mana. He asks if there's anyone else who can use Perfect Heal and Perfect Cure, but none of them have skills like that, so there aren't many options. Just then, the system informs Hibiki that he can use his contract skill to form an MP transfer contract to make up for the deficit, and all he needs to do is get verbal consent from all involved parties. As soon as he hears this, he tells everyone that they need to agree to transfer their MP to him, and since it's to save their friend, they all agree without a second thought. Hibiki gains a lot of MP thanks to the transfer, but he's still short by almost 200, so Jewel offers to transfer her MP as well. As soon as Hibiki hits the required amount, he casts the healing spells, restoring the adventurer's injured limbs and saving his life. However, Hibiki collapses a moment later from the strain of using that much MP at once. Sometime later, Hibiki wakes up on a couch in a meeting room, and his level has gone up by quite a bit, so he is really excited. But after his little celebration dance, he realizes that Jewel was in the room and she saw the whole thing, so he's a little embarrassed now. Jewel thanks him for saving her little brother, and Hibiki is surprised to find out that Jade is her brother, but he says he was happy to help. She also mentions that she took the liberty of putting a gag order in place to make sure that no one speaks of what happened today. Hibiki asks why, so she explains that it is almost unheard of for someone to be capable of using both Perfect Heal and Perfect Cure, so if word gets out, then someone is bound to try and exploit Hibiki for money. On that note, she tells him that he should probably join a party or hire a bodyguard to protect himself, since he's a non-combatant. And meanwhile, down in the dungeon, there's a wolfman who looks like he'd be perfect for the job. Hibiki decides to hire a bodyguard for himself, so he books a meeting with a man named Debbie to find one. But Debbie seems a little weird because the first thing he does after meeting Hibiki is start sniffing him. After the initial awkward introduction, Debbie brings out 5 of his strongest men and tells Hibiki to choose whoever he wants as his bodyguard, but Hibiki turns them all down immediately. He feels bad for rejecting them all, but while they were all indeed very strong, none of them had high enough MP stats. Hibiki would like to have someone around with enough MP, so if push comes to shove, he can use them to activate his medical skills. He apologizes to Debbie for being so picky, but Debbie says it's no problem at all, since after all, he can smell the scent of great financial fortune on Hibiki, so he is more than happy to do everything in his power to help him find what he's looking for. Hearing Debbie talk about the scent of fortune, Hibiki figures that must be the reason he was sniffing him earlier, and sure enough, when he takes a look at Debbie's stat screen, there's a skill there called Sense for Money, which probably allows him to smell when someone is going to become rich, but Hibiki has no idea how it works. While they continue looking for suitable candidates, Hibiki looks down a dark corridor, but Debbie tells him that the options down that path are rather flawed, so he might want to pick another corridor. He explains that the people there are neither suitable for combat nor manual labor, and they also can't afford to return to their homeland either, so Debbie decided to do them a favor and let them stay here. Hearing that these people can't return to their homeland, Hibiki wonders if they were isekai just like him, so he asks Debbie to take him to them. Debbie does as Hibiki asks and leads him down the corridor, but they eventually come across a cell with a wolfman and a little girl inside, and Debbie can already tell what Hibiki is thinking, so he clarifies that this isn't one of those slave situations. They used to have regular bedrooms, but the wolf attacked another guest a few days back because he wanted to protect the little girl. It was all a misunderstanding, but now the wolf flares up when literally anyone gets close, so they had to put him in the cell for the other's safety. Just then, the wolf yells at Hibiki to get lost, and Hibiki can see why the other guests would be scared of this guy. But when he takes a look at his stats, he notices something interesting. The system informs him that some of the wolf's stats are currently hidden, so it uses Expert Eye to peer past the falsifications, and Hibiki finds out that the wolf is currently bound by a status ailment known as Immovable Chain, and it is basically an invisible curse that severely weakens a target permanently, which is why the wolf's stats look so mediocre now. But before the curse, he used to be a level 95 hero, and Hibiki wasn't expecting to find someone so amazing. Next, he tries to appraise the little girl, and he finds out that her name is Lillian, but more importantly, he finds out that she is a sage with the status ailment of out-of-control magic. She possesses immense amounts of magic power, but since she can't control it, she will likely end up self-destructing at some point. Both Lillian and Claude have more than enough magic power for what Hibiki needs, but he's a little concerned about the implications of him hiring a hero and a sage to be his bodyguards. Sapo suggests that Hibiki should use the relief measure technical skill since it has the ability to lift status ailments depending on his proficiency, and if that means Hibiki can help Claude, then he wants to give it a try. He tells Debbie that he wants to hire Claude and Lillian, and after that, he takes them out to the forest. Claude's condition is pretty bad since he's missing 2 arms and a leg, but he is still being really protective of Lillian because he thinks Hibiki plans to do something bad to her now that they are out in the woods alone. Hibiki does admit that he plans to do a lot of things, but he assures Claude that there's nothing to be worried about. First, he says he wants to heal Claude's injuries, but to do that, he's going to need a lot of MP, so he asks Lillian to lend him a hand. Claude thinks this must be some kind of trap and warns Lillian not to trust Hibiki, but if this is going to help heal Claude, then Lillian is willing to do whatever it takes because she owes him a lot for looking out for her. She agrees to help Hibiki, so the MP sharing contract is formed, and now that he has a sufficient supply of mana, he is able to cast Perfect Heal on Claude to restore all of his limbs. Claude is amazed because he never could have imagined that he would meet someone with magic strong enough to restore his body, although he'd be lying if he said he felt as good as he did in his prime. Hibiki already expected that, and he assumes it's probably because of the curse, so he will handle that next. Claude is shocked to learn that Hibiki is aware of his curse since it should be invisible to even the best appraisers, but Hibiki explains that he has the Expert Eye skill, which allows him to see things that most appraisers wouldn't be able to. That's also how he knows that Claude used to be a hero, and that Lillian will be a sage when she grows up. But that aside, it's time for him to get rid of that curse. He casts the release spell, and all of a sudden, the invisible chains binding Claude materialize as a pair of scissors descends from above. With one swift motion, the scissors cut one of the chains binding Claude, and Hibiki is quite disappointed since he thinks it's lame that the spell was only able to cut one of the chains. But this is the best he can do when his relief skill is still only at level 1. That said, even though only one of the chains was cut, Claude can still feel a portion of his former strength returning to him, and he is deeply grateful to Hibiki for his help, so he offers to swear his allegiance to him. Hibiki says he doesn't mind, and Claude is happy to hear that, but then Sapo speaks up and suggests that Hibiki should use his contract skill to perform the Pledge of Allegiance. The contract skill has the ability to hold all parties to their promises, so if Claude pledges his allegiance to Hibiki with a contract, he will never be able to betray him. Hibiki thinks that sounds fair since Claude was the one who suggested pledging allegiance in the first place, so Claude performs the pledge, and after the contract has been formed, a mark appears on the hands of Hibiki and Claude to symbolize their pact. After the pact has been completed, Hibiki sits down with Claude and Lillian to explain a few of his abilities to them. He mentions that he is able to use a bunch of high-level medical spells, but he doesn't have enough MP to activate any of them, which is why he needs to share their MP in order to use his abilities effectively. For that reason, he asks them if they'd be willing to form a permanent MP sharing contract with him, and both Lillian and Claude agree without a second thought. After forming the contract, Sapo informs Hibiki that his technical skill grimoire has leveled up, and Hibiki is about to ask what that means, but all of a sudden, Claude says he has a question he'd like to ask. He has been meaning to ask about this for a while now, but every so often, he sees Hibiki look off into empty space while talking to himself, so he is worried that something might be wrong with him. Hibiki assures him that it's nothing to be worried about, and he explains that he simply has a voice in his head that provides him with useful information from time to time. And Hibiki kind of expected him to think he's crazy after saying something like that, but to his surprise, Claude actually seems to know about the voice. He recognizes it as the tutorial skill, and if Hibiki has the tutorial skill, then that must mean that he's a person who was brought here from another world. Hibiki can't believe Claude knows about transmigrators, but he doesn't really know much about the title. He had just heard about it before. However, Lillian, on the other hand, has never heard of isekai before, so she asked for an explanation, and Claude explains that it simply means that Hibiki came from a faraway place. Hibiki asks them if they are really okay with him being from another world. Claude says it doesn't bother him at all, and furthermore, anyone would be happy to team up with Hibiki since he is someone who possesses the elusive tutorial skill that is only directly granted by God. Hibiki is shocked to learn that the tutorial skill is really that overpowered, so he calls up God and asks him if it's really that strong. God says it's not that big of a deal, but then again, the tutorial skill is currently eating up about a third of his power, so maybe it is overpowered. After discussing the details with Claude, he says he believes that the god Hibiki is connected to is the chief god. All in all, there are 11 gods that exist in this world, and the chief god is believed to be the first one, so divine abilities like the tutorial and expert eyes can only be granted by him. Hibiki had no idea that the chief god was the oldest one in this world because he always speaks casually to him, but Claude thinks that means the chief god must have taken a liking to Hibiki. However, Hibiki thinks that if anything, the gods favor Claude and Lillian more because being granted the skills of a hero and a sage are incredible. Though, he does think that the gods went a little too far when they gave Lillian the Raging Sanctuary skill because it's a little too much for a child to bear. Lillian asks what Hibiki is talking about since she has never heard about the skill before, so Hibiki explains that it's a skill that gives her enormous amounts of magic power, so much so that her body can't control it all. Lillian is heartbroken to hear that because that uncontrollable magic is what caused her to be ostracized by her family and sold to settle alone. Claude mentions that magical skills like that are usually the jurisdiction of the magic god, so Hibiki doesn't understand why the chief god gave Lillian a skill like that, and the chief god admits that he may have messed up when he gave Lillian that skill. When the magic god finds out what he did, she is absolutely livid. After dealing with the chief god, the magic god introduces herself to Hibiki and apologizes for the trouble, but once one of her skills has been assigned, it can't be taken back, so Lillian is stuck with the Raging Sanctuary. But fortunately, Hibiki also happens to possess one of her grimoire skills, so since he is currently linked to Lillian via contract, her MP can be regulated if he adjusts the output. Hibiki decides to try out the skill the god of magic talked about, so he activates it, and a little cat named Ven spawns. Ven explains that she was sent by the god of magic to explain the ins and outs of magic to him, but before she can even finish her sentence, Lillian picks her up and starts petting her because she's so cute. Hibiki joins in on the fun as well, and Claude looks visibly upset because he is feeling left out. Once Hibiki is done petting Vane, he asks her what exactly he needs to do to use magic, and she explains that she herself is the grimoire, so she will take care of all the spell casting for him. Hibiki thanks her for the help and pets Vene on the head again, but doing so sends Claude over the edge because Hibiki hasn't pet him even once, yet this cat that appeared 10 seconds ago has been receiving so much attention from him, and he won't stand for this injustice. A moment later, Claude calms himself down and apologizes for the outburst, and Hibiki completely ignores the whole thing while asking Vene to explain a few things about magic to him. But Vene is too shocked by everything that just happened to even move. Hibiki decides to take Claude and Lillian to go shopping for some gear, and after Claude has picked out his armor, he looks like a true warrior. That said, Hibiki is rather surprised by the fact that Claude uses a spear as his main weapon, since he always assumed a hero would only use a sword. Claude explains that a spear is the most suitable weapon for his build, and as for why he's only wearing a partial set of armor, it would be way too hot in there if he wore a full set. After Claude, Lillian picks out some gear as well, and Hibiki thinks it looks good on her, but then the storekeeper tells him it's going to cost 25 gold, and Hibiki is in shock at first because that sounds like a steep price, but apparently, that's pretty cheap as far as adventuring gear goes. Lillian tells Hibiki he doesn't need to buy the gear for her if it'll cost too much, But Hibiki assures her that it's perfectly fine because her life is way more important to him than a little money. But even though he says that, with how much they've already spent, they are going to be broke soon if they don't complete some quests soon. And to make matters worse, because Veni is feeling left out with everyone else getting new gear, he picks out a collar, which costs Hibiki an additional 15 gold coins. Later that day, Veni brings everyone out into the plain so he can give Hibiki his first magic training lesson, and Hibiki asks if they can put this on hold for a while because they need to make some more money first, but Veni insists that this is really important since both Hibiki and Lillian lack any knowledge of the fundamentals of adventuring, much less the basics of magic. Veni promises to teach Hibiki everything he needs to know about magic, and Hibiki gets excited because he thinks this means he will be able to fight with magic. But unfortunately, Ven tells him that the best he's ever going to get is some basic household magic, and Hibiki falls into despair when he hears that because it means he's going to be stuck as a weakling forever. Even so, Veni tells him that it's important to learn how to control magic power, so for their first lesson, he is going to have Hibiki learn how to circulate mana so he can get Lillian's magic power under control, and the first step towards that end is to register him as an accountable party. Hibiki asks him how he's going to do that, but before he can even get an answer, Veni bites his finger, and that was apparently all it took to complete the registration. Ven then goes up to Lillian, and he tells her that from now on, her magic power is going to be limited to around 10%, so she doesn't cause her body any harm. And the more she learns how to control her magic successfully, the more she will be able to unleash her true power. The next step of the process is to have Hibiki dual cultivate with Lillian and circulate mana between his and her body to stabilize it. But Hibiki has no idea how to do any of that. So Vinay asks Claude to inject some of his mana into Hibiki's body so he can get a feel for it. Claude does as instructed, and a moment later, Hibiki finds himself in an empty space with no one else around him. A moment later, he notices an elf lady sitting by the lake, so he goes up to her, and she calls him by Claude's name. Hibiki is confused by this at first, but then he looks down at himself and realizes he really is Claude, so this must be Claude's memories. The elf woman's name is Anastasia, and Claude had been by her side since she was little. They fought, cried, and laughed together, and Claude had hoped that things would remain that way forever. But one day, Anastasia betrayed him, slaughtering a whole troop of soldiers and severing Claude's arm, all with a smile on her face. By the time Hibiki wakes up, he sees Claude standing over him, asking if he's awake, and at first, Hibiki is still convinced that he is Claude, but after a few minutes, he is reminded of who he is. He thinks it's weird that he genuinely believed he was Claude for a moment there, but Veni explains that it was likely because having Claude share his mana with him plunged Hibiki deep into Claude's consciousness, so he lost his sense of self for a while. On that note, Veni asks Hibiki if he happened to see anything interesting in Claude's memories, but Hibiki can't actually remember much of what happened aside from the fact that it was bad. A little while later, Hibiki is busy training himself to learn how to use household magic, and in order to learn the magic, he needs to repeat the actions of chores over and over before he can learn it. But he has been at this for a while now, and according to Sapo, he still hasn't made any progress learning household magic. Just then, Lillian and Claude come in looking for Hibiki, because it's time for dinner, but Claude accidentally knocks over a bucket, undoing all of Hibiki's hard work mopping the floor. He begs Hibiki for forgiveness, but Hibiki says it's not that big of a deal since he can just clean the floor again, and while Claude is still contemplating what he has done, Hibiki proceeds to speed clean the entire room, as well as the entire hallway. After he's done, he asks Sapo if that was enough for him to unlock the household magic yet, but Sapo tells him he's still got a long way to go. Just then, the hostess comes up to call the group down for dinner, and she is amazed by what she sees because the hallway has never been this clean before. She asks Hibiki if he was the one who did this, and after he confirms it, she tells him she is very pleased. So pleased, in fact, that she offers to slip him some extra milk during dinner, and Hibiki thinks nothing of it, but she was probably talking about giving it to him straight from the source. Later on, Hibiki and Lillian are continuing their magic training, and Lillian has already learned how to conjure some basic spells, which Hibiki thinks is very impressive, while she and Vene are working on improving her control. Claude goes up to Hibiki and asks if he would like to do some physical training today. Hibiki isn't exactly against the idea, but he doubts he's strong enough to use a sword in battle. But not to worry because Claude already thought of that, which is exactly why he brought a bow for Hibiki to use instead. He sets up a target for Hibiki to take aim at, and Hibiki does his best, but unsurprisingly, he sucks at archery just as much as everything else. However, no matter how useless Hibiki may seem, Claude refuses to give up on him, so he orders Hibiki to stretch his back, pull the bowstring back further, and try again. Now that Hibiki is using proper form, his arrows are at least making it all the way to the tree, but his aim is still trash. Hibiki is exhausted because he had no idea that archery was so demanding, because Amalia made it look so effortless, but Claude tells him he will get used to it the more he practices. Hibiki asks him if they can at least take a break for today because his hands are all red and swollen, but Claude casually tells him to stop being silly, because Hibiki can use healing magic to heal his hands, so there's no need for him to ever take a break. And just like that, Hibiki is forced to fire arrows over and over at the tree and elsewhere. Amalia is still on her journey back to her hometown, and she wonders how Hibiki is doing. She's sure he'd be surprised to learn that she has actually made friends on her journey, and Styria notices that Amalia seems to be in a good mood about something. But Amalia says she doesn't know what Styria is talking about. The path up ahead splits into two sections, but even though Amalia knows one of the paths is shorter, she still suggests that they should take the other path. Ivor asks why. So Amalia explains that the shortcut leads through a ruined forest, and rumor has it that the souls who haunt that forest play tricks on anyone who approaches, so it's best to keep their distance. However, despite Amalia's warning, Ivor thinks the forest sounds interesting and decides that she wants to go check it out. Amalia doesn't understand why Ivor could possibly want to go into a haunted forest, but Ivor says locations like these are usually the kind of place where you'd find hidden treasure, so it's worth checking out. Amalia understands her line of thinking, but she's pretty sure any hidden treasures must have been picked clean by passing adventurers already. That said, she still agrees to go because she's pretty much broke right now, so if there's a chance to find some treasure, she might as well go for it. Meanwhile, back on Hibiki's end, while Lillian continues her training, Hibiki is busy making lunch for everyone, and after tasting the meal, he realizes that it's a little bland. So he's about to add some spices, and Lillian wants to help, so she hands Hibiki the salt and pepper, and when she tastes the food, she thinks it's absolutely delicious. Now that the food is ready, Hibiki serves everyone and they all love the food he made, but when it comes to the sides that Claude made, Hibiki tries to eat a mushroom, and as soon as he takes a bite, he realizes that something is wrong because Claude didn't clean the mushroom properly. He also notices a distinct lack of apples at the table when he recalls asking Claude to go get some, and Claude tries to pretend that he forgot, but Lillian finds a whole pile of apples behind him. So she starts scolding Claude and tells him he shouldn't be hiding his mistakes. Hibiki asks if Claude at least knows how to butcher monsters, since most adventurers are capable of doing that much, and Claude proudly states that he's great at butchering, so Hibiki tells him that that's going to be his job from now on because his cooking skills are absolute garbage. Claude shrinks back in shame and tries to explain that his lack of cooking skills is because of the curse, and that if Hibiki ever manages to get rid of the curse, then he really will be good at cooking. But neither Hibiki nor Lillian really believe him. Speaking of the curse, Hibiki asks Claude if he knows who placed the curse on him in the first place, and Claude thinks about it for a second, but then he responds by saying he doesn't know, and Hibiki doesn't question him any further after that. A little while later, everyone is done with dinner for the day, so Hibiki is washing the dishes in the river when all of a sudden, he is informed that he finally unlocked a household chore spell that allows him to wash things automatically. Hibiki is really excited to hear this, but Seppo actually has one more thing to mention, so she warns him that there's a large boar monster heading this way. Sure enough, there really is a boar monster, and it seems really mad for some reason, but Hibiki and the others aren't really worried because Claude is here to deal with it, and with one strike from his spear, the boar drops dead to the ground. Even though the immediate threat has been dealt with, Claude warns that if they don't do something about the boar's blood soon, then the scent of blood will attract even more monsters. This is where the new spell Lillian learned comes in, because she is able to use it to suck up and isolate all the blood from the boar, so all that's left is a clean carcass, and now Claude plans to use the opportunity to teach Hibiki how to butcher a monster so he can try it himself next time, and Hibiki seems a little hesitant because butchering sounds really gross. Meanwhile, back on Amalia's end, she and the others have just reached the fort in the ruined forest, and Ivor is convinced that if there's going to be treasure, then it must be in there. Both Amalia and Styria decide to go in to check it out, and while they are gone, Ivor checks if this place contains the restless soul that she's after, but even though there are indeed restless souls here, it's not what she's after. Meanwhile, inside the fort, Amalia and Styria seem to have fallen victim to the ghostly tricks here, because Amalia is currently hallucinating that she found a ton of treasure, and Styria is hallucinating that she's getting to stuff her face in Amalia's chest, but in reality, neither of those things are happening. Back with Hibiki, the group is done packing up all the boar meat, and they are preparing to continue their journey, but all that work got them really dirty, so Hibiki wants to take a bath, but there's no time for that right now. Fortunately, he has the bubble wash spell now, so he says he wants to try it out, but hearing him say this gets Lillian and Claude on edge, because considering how bad Hibiki is at everything, they don't want to risk letting him use a new spell on them. However, it's already too late to back out now since Hibiki has already cast the spell on Claude, and it turns out that it works really well because Claude looks like a Wolfman model now. Hibiki and the others are pretty broke right now after all the expenses they have incurred, so he suggests that they should finally start taking adventuring quests to make some money. Everyone is in agreement on this since Hibiki and Lillian have gotten a fair bit stronger after all their training, but Claude still insists that they start with only F-rank jobs. After that, they go to Jewel to officially register as adventurers, and once that is done, Claude picks out a bunch of F-rank quests for them to do. Hibiki asks him why they are doing so many, so he reminds Hibiki that F-rank quests pay close to nothing. So if they want to make any real money, they need to complete multiple at once. Among all the quests, Claude happens to notice that one quest is ranked pretty high. The quest is to find a bandit who is on the run, but the only lead available on who this bandit is the sale of their tail. And that's not a lot to go off, which is why the quest rank was raised. Hibiki doesn't really have any intention of getting involved with bandits, so he decides to just ignore it and carry on with the missions he currently has. A little while later, Hibiki is out in the forest hunting, and he has found a rabbit close by, so he raises his bow to see if he can take it down from here. Several failed attempts later, Hibiki does manage to take out the bunny, and while it may have been a pitiful demonstration of marksmanship, at least Hibiki managed to eventually hit his target this time, so that's a major improvement. A little while later, Lillian and Veni return after gathering some fruit in the woods called machikachika. It is mainly used as a marker so you don't get lost while traveling in the forest, and to demonstrate, Lillian proceeds to chuck one of the fruit at a tree, covering it in rainbow-colored juice. Meanwhile, on Amalia's end, her group has set up camp for the night, and they are approaching the border of the Elven Kingdom, so their journey has almost come to an end. Ivel is quite disappointed with how this turned out because she hasn't found any traces of the woman's soul she has been looking for, and Amalia still has no idea that Ivel only agreed to come because of her search and not because she wanted to be friends with her. She even offers her a special friendship bracelet, which will alert her if anything bad ever happens to Ivel so she can come to her rescue immediately, and Ivel accepts it, deciding that she might as well continue pretending to be Amalia's friend. The next day, Hibiki heads into town with Claude and Lillian, and he says that they can splurge a little on a nice meal today since they made a lot of money yesterday. Gathering herbs was rather easy thanks to Hibiki's skill, and he gathered so much that the clerk began to suspect that he had done something illegal to get them. Just then, as they were walking, Hibiki happens to come across Balls, and it has been a while since he last saw him since he has been away on a business trip to the capital for a while now. Balls is happy to see Hibiki again and asks him if he has managed to build up any muscle since last time. But Hibiki doesn't have much to show for his efforts, so Balls offers to give him a few pointers on how to build the perfect physique. However, before he could do anything, Claude steps in front of Hibiki and tells Balls that he is the only person who is allowed to train Hibiki, so Balls has no right to butt in like this. Balls tells him he's doing a terrible job of training him since he clearly doesn't have enough muscle to be an effective adventurer. But Claude believes that growing large muscles will only slow Hibiki down, so there's no point in doing weight training. The two are really starting to get on each other's nerves now, so they both draw their weapons and attack one another. Claude tries to tackle Balls to the ground, but Balls' thick muscles make him as sturdy as a brick wall, so he doesn't even budge an inch. He then begins putting pressure on Claude, and the shockwave from their clash is starting to cause collateral damage, so Hibiki is starting to wonder how strong Balls really is. He asks Sapo to scan him, and after she does, it is revealed that Balls' stats are absolutely stacked, so there's no way Claude can win this battle. Balls tells Claude to just give up already and knocks him back because he is clearly stronger, but Claude refuses to back down. However, before the two could start fighting again, Jewel shows up after hearing all the commotion, and she blasts them with a wave of ice magic to stop the fight. After Claude and Balls have been incapacitated, all of a sudden, a fat woman comes running down the street yelling that someone just stole her purse. And speaking of thieves, Vinny asks Hibiki where his bag of money went. Hibiki had no idea that the bag was even gone in the first place, but Jewel tells him that when she got here, he wasn't holding a bag at all. She assumes this must have been the work of that bandit she told him about yesterday, and he's mortified because all of his hard work just went to waste. Jewel apologizes for his loss, but there's not much she can do to help, since they don't have any info on what the bandit looks like. All they know is that the bandit can make their tail look like a snake sometimes, and they usually target rich people whenever they are stealing. That really isn't much information to work with, but they need to do something if they are going to get their money back. So they come up with a plan and have Hibiki disguise himself as a girl to lure the bandit out without them recognizing him. The idea is that if they leave a fake bag of money on the edge of the table, then when the thief inevitably tries to come steal it, they'll be able to catch her red-handed, and Claude is waiting at a nearby table to beat the crap out of the bandit for stealing from Hibiki. Soon after, the waiter comes over to take Hibiki's order, and Hibiki decides to order some pancakes. But after the waiter brings the order out to him, Claude suddenly gets up and yells that they've been tricked because it turns out that the waiter was the bandit all along. And she just stole the dummy bag that they left on the table, and she is currently running away as they speak. Fortunately, they had thought ahead and put some of the machikachika fruit juice in the bag, so they are able to follow the trail and track the bandit down to an underground club. The place may look shady, but everyone here is actually pretty nice, and nothing illegal is going on. So they start wondering what a bandit would be doing down here. But just then, a woman in a hoodie brushes past Hibiki, and Claude thinks she looks rather familiar, so he asks Hibiki to use his appraisal skill on her, and sure enough, they find out that the woman is indeed the bandit. They follow her out into an alleyway and Claude cuts her off from the front, while Hibiki and Lillian cut her off from behind. Fauna tries to feign ignorance and asks them if there's something wrong, but Hibiki already knows for sure that she's the bandit, because his appraisal skill showed him everything, including her full government name and the fact that she's got a special tail transformation skill. Fauna realizes that there's no point in hiding anymore if he already knows that much about her, so she takes off her cloak to reveal herself, and Claude clearly thinks she's hot. Fauna goes on to say she knows that Hibiki was trying to trick her with the dummy purse he set on the table earlier, but she managed to grab the real one off him as well when she brushed past him back there, though. The contents weren't as impressive as the bag she stole from him earlier. Now all that's left is for her to make her escape, so she knocks on some wood nearby, causing a bunch of wood to come crashing down in Hibiki and Lillian's directions, so Claude is forced to go save them, buying Fauna enough time to get away. Claude and Lillian get buried under the wood, so they won't be able to get out for a while, so it's up to Hibiki to go after Fauna on his own. He does his best, but as he is chasing Fauna, he ends up falling into one of her traps and getting strung up by his feet. Fauna is surprised because even though she's a master trap setter, it's almost unbelievable that an appraiser would fall for such a simple trap. Just then, she takes a closer look at Hibiki's shorts, and she's shocked to find out that he's actually a boy. She asks him why he is dressed up like a girl, and Hibiki says he did it to catch her as bait, but even if that was the case, that doesn't explain why he was still wearing the dress after they figured out who she was. Fauna has grown rather interested in Hibiki because she thinks he's pretty cute, so she offers him a deal and says she's willing to give back his money, but in exchange, he will have to do something for her. Hibiki asks her if she wants him to appraise stolen goods for her, and that's pretty much the gist of it. She wants to know whether the things she stole are actually worth something or not, so she takes Hibiki to a bar downtown and starts showing him items from her stash one after another. The first item is a jewel-encrusted ring, and after appraising it, Hibiki confirms that it is indeed real. However, the same can't be said for the second item because although it may look like a pearl necklace, it's actually just a necklace of random rocks that simply happen to look like pearls. Seeing that Hibiki's appraisal skills are the real deal, Fauna slides a wooden bracelet over to him, and Hibiki is a little surprised since this thing doesn't really look like it's meant to be valuable. But he appraises it anyway and tells Fauna that it is an ordinary wooden bracelet with an inscription on it. Hearing this, Fauna perks up and asks Hibiki if he can tell her what the inscription says, so Hibiki tells her that it just says thank you. And Fauna is unbelievably happy to hear that. She explains that the bracelet was the last gift she ever got from her sister, and she has been trying to figure out what the inscription says for a long time, but no one could ever decipher what it said. Which makes sense since Fauna's sister didn't really know how to write, so it just looks like a bunch of nonsense. But Hibiki's appraisal was able to read the intent behind the scribbles even if it was illegible. Hibiki asks if Fauna's sister knows that she's a thief, but Fauna tells him her sister is actually long dead. She got mixed up in some battles back home and didn't make it out alive. Fauna asks Hibiki where he comes from, and Hibiki says he's from a faraway place. So Fauna tells him that if he has a home to go back to, then he had better go back because if he loses it, he won't have anywhere to turn to. He may not really understand what she's talking about, but if Claude is from the same place as her, then she's sure he must have a past that's just as dark as hers. Anyway, she's going to leave now, and as promised, in return for Hibiki's help, she gives him his money back. She also kisses him on the cheek and says she looks forward to seeing him again. Later on, Hibiki returns to the others and tells them about what happened. And even though Fauna got away, at least he managed to get his money back. While he's here, Balls also mentions that he heard that there's a party in the capital that has been growing very quickly lately. They call themselves the Corpse Killers, and they mostly hunt undead, but Hibiki had no idea zombies were even a thing in this world, so he's honestly a little scared, especially since there's a chance that he might run into zombies someday as well. Later on, Hibiki and the others are preparing for bed, and Hibiki is thinking about everything he learned today, but Claude tells him he's bound to learn even more things when he goes on a journey eventually. Hibiki thinks about it, and he does like the idea of going on a journey, especially since it will be a good way for him to figure out how to get back to his world. But when Lillian hears that Hibiki wants to go back to his world, she freezes because she can't believe that he wants to leave them. Hibiki hadn't really thought about it before, but going back home really does mean that he'd be abandoning everything he has here, and he's not sure if that's what he really wants. Meanwhile, Amalia's group is closing in on the elf village, but while they are walking, Amalia mentions the fact that she once got a message from the spirit telling her that something precious has landed in the eastern part of the Rowell Forest, and the second Ivel hears that. She thinks it might be a good lead on her search, so she quits pretending to be Amalia's friend and ditches her to continue her search. This was the end of episode 5. Subscribe to not miss the next part.